All right, there we go. All right.
Action.
Well, that's right. All right, so we are joined here by Camille Hosman, who is a graduate of the Political Science Department and has an interesting job. And we're going to ask her about that. And we're going to ask her a little bit about her time here at Mizzou and all of those good things. So welcome, Camille. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And so what year did you graduate from Mizzou?
2015.
2015. So 5 years out. And,
yeah.
And you majored in?
Political science, of course. What else?
Very good. Very good. So what do you think was, so why don't you tell us what you do now?
I'm the Associate Director of Federal Affairs for the University of Pennsylvania.
So is that lobbying?
I am one of 2 lobbyists for the University of Pennsylvania that we affectionately call PEN here in Washington, D.C., which is where I am currently streaming in from.
So PEN is private, yes, or does it have a public component to it?
So it has a very, very small public component, but we are a private university, yeah.
Okay, so what kinds of interests does a private university have in having full-time? Because, you know, Mizzou has gone back and forth between having permanent representation in Washington as a very public institution. So what kinds of things do you lobby on?
And private universities alike have a lot of shared interests and a lot of different interests in federal policy and therefore in federal lobbying. I primarily work on science and research policy. Penn does roughly $1 billion worth of federally funded research every year. And so it's really important for those programs to be maintained by Congress and to be supported by the federal agencies as well. Other policy areas I work in are immigration policy. We have a lot of international students and foreign scholars and researchers and physicians and surgeons that come to the University of Pennsylvania. And it's important for us to have that diversity of thought and that diversity of background and that diversity of knowledge on campus. And immigration policy is federal policy. And so if they change their policies here in DC, the university is directly impacted by those things. And then of course, there are the sort of more obvious policy areas that both public and private universities share. So supporting things like federal student aid programs, other higher education policy governed by the federal government, issues like Title IX, that affect all universities, large and small, public and private.
So how did you come to this career? What led you to this career? Was it something in college or is it something that you've done since college? How did you end up doing this?
Both something in college and since college. I think that it's important for people, especially in classes like Political Science 1100, to know that no career is a direct path. I mean, you know this, Dr. Horner. Nothing is straightforward. And I got a lot of exposure to university policy when I was in school at Mizzou. I interned for the Office of Government Relations when I was there, thanks to my work in student government, but also thanks to my interest in public policy that I gained from the Political Science Department and the interest in policy making. And so my work with government relations at the University of Missouri exposed me to science policy that I now work on, but also lobbied directly on for 4 years before I came to Penn. So I've actually now been a federal lobbyist for almost 5 years. So almost exactly since I graduated, I've been working in some way lobbying the federal government.
Well, that's how typical do you think that is a career path to go right into lobbying? Or how much do you think that sort of other people that you work with and that you see day to day, is it pretty typical that they go right into lobbying or do they typically do something else before lobbying?
I don't want to call myself special in any way here, but it's not particularly typical. And I actually, when I talk to people, when I mentor other young women that are here in DC that are interested in lobbying, I actually wouldn't even encourage it. I would say that finding your interest in politics or in policy is so much more important to do first before you want to be a lobbyist. And I can talk for days about why lobbying is really important to inform the public discourse. That's not what we're here to do. I think that primarily it's important to find your passion. And perhaps your passion is educating people, and perhaps your passion is a certain type of policy. And I think those are great reasons to go into lobbying, but I wouldn't say that it's something you should do right out of school.
Right. I actually think that it would be interesting to hear you talk about the value of lobbying to the process of policy making. So go ahead, give me your take on that.
Sure. So I'm actually preparing a brief presentation for my brother-in-law's university course at Middle Tennessee University on this exact topic. But I think for one, lobbying serves a very important educational purpose for legislative staff, and I think this is something that this was research that I was exposed to when I was a political sciences student. That term limits in particular, but also low pay and turnover within legislative offices at all levels of government produce a lack of depth of knowledge, frankly, in policy topics, and lobbyists fill that void. And sometimes that's very bad because it can lead to corruption, and we've certainly seen that some places. I don't want to throw any shade at Jefferson City, but also it's very important because I, for example, can spend all of my time working just on issues that impact a private university, and I interact with staffers from the Pennsylvania congressional delegation, and they're working on education, they're working on healthcare, they're working on immigration, they're working on social security issues and taxation issues. And I certainly know a little bit about all of those things as they relate to the University of Pennsylvania, which happens to be a very large employer, and so we play an important role in these districts. But I'm able to really dive deep down, and I think that's an important part of what lobbyists can do. I certainly don't think we're the most important part of the democratic process. Lobbying is protected in the First Amendment of the Constitution as our right to petition the government, and I think that it's important to consider that there are some lobbyists that will just pay off policymakers, but we play an important role in educating and in creating policy.
Yeah, in my experience of bringing legislators and lobbyists into class, they've almost always agreed that lobbyists are a valuable part to the process, right? Legislators have to be, and even policymakers in executive branches that are more specialized, they have to be, making policy in lots of areas that they don't necessarily know. And a lobbyist can bring that kind of, depth of knowledge that a legislator or another policymaker might not have.
And a particular perspective as well. I think that as I mentioned, so the University of Pennsylvania is the largest employer in Philadelphia, for example, which is a very large city and has multiple congressional districts, and so we're able to speak from a very particular perspective.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's valuable.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think so too. So do you think that? So do you lobby Capitol Hill? Do you lobby the education department? Both, or where are you generally spending your time?
So at the moment, I'm spending.
You're not trapped inside because of COVID.
Yeah, so I think that I'll actually need to sort of rewind to my previous job where I was a lobbyist, and I worked primarily on Capitol Hill, but also with federal agencies. I would argue that right now I'm stuck in my apartment. And I'm still relatively new to Penn, and so I'm sort of coming on board and meeting and starting to meet people. But previously, when I worked on science and research policy, I worked both with Capitol Hill and federal agencies, and it basically alternated times of year because Congress spends money. And so it's important for people who want to influence the way that money is spent to work really hard at the beginning of the year. And then after that money is spent, which of course doesn't happen all the time on time anymore, but after that money is spent, it's important to, if the federal agency has any questions about how that money should be spent or any augments to policy based on what Congress has given them, to make your voice known there. It's a lot harder to lobby federal agencies than it is to Congress. They don't have an open door policy. You can't really walk in like you can to Congress, but it's a very important part of policymaking in general. Is this mammoth federal bureaucracy, in addition to Congress?
Yeah. Well, I won't ask you any questions that put you on the spot. I have a lot. I'm very curious about this whole process, right? And so, but I won't ask you, like, who's your favorite legislator or anything like that. But
I got so many feelings.
Yeah. So is this, do you anticipate doing some version of this for your whole career?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I should probably know the answer. I don't.
Okay.
So as Dr. Horner knows, as all of my political science professors probably know, I really am a talkative person. I like talking to people. I like getting to know new people, and this is a great way to do it. Honestly, like when it's normal times, when I'm not trapped in my apartment, I get to talk to strangers, and I love that. And I think that sharing valuable information about policymaking and making new friends along the way. Don't really have any complaints. But also, I think it's important for political science students to know that lobbying is a sort of a legal definition of interacting. But there's also lots of other types of policy communication that you can use your degree for that's very valuable, that isn't explicitly influencing like lobbying is. Yep. And so perhaps maybe I'll do one of those things someday.
Yeah. Well, so is there one thing that you can think of maybe from your time as a college student that was the most, what do you think is sort of the most important thing that helped you figure out what you wanted to do? Maybe not for your whole life, but as a first thing out of college. Is there a single experience or a class or, something that you recommend students do? Because, as they're starting their college career maybe, or really starting to think for the first time about what they want to do.
As I'm sure all students, including Poli Sci 1100 students, are thinking about their career and their first career move out of college, it's sort of high stakes, right? Like for example, I moved to Washington, D.C. immediately after I graduated. That's a big step. And so I think that the most important thing to do while you're in school, and what I did, is take classes and do things and have experiences to figure out what you don't want to do. I worked on a state Senate race when I was in college, and I realized I'm terrible at campaigns. I'm not interested. No, thank you. And so I just crossed that off the list. I took some classes. I took some wonderful classes in foreign policy and international relations that were really, really interesting. But I also knew that that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. I wasn't as thrilled about it as I was with the American government courses and the constitutional law courses. And I think that's sort of what drove me in this direction. So right. Figure out what you don't like.
Yeah.
Make note of it.
That advice, actually. Yeah. I've never heard somebody put it exactly that way. I think that's really strong advice. So, I think that, well, I guess what I'm curious about is if you're willing to, if somebody watches this and has more questions, if you're willing to be in touch with people and if you have time to do that kind of thing and answer questions about what you do.
Yes, please. I think that so I'm also an alum of the Kinder program.
Yeah.
And I was very sad this year to hear that they weren't coming to DC. But of course, anyone in political science at all, please email me if you have any questions, or if just any questions about living in Washington. It's sort of a weird place, or what it was like to move as soon as I graduated. So I'm happy to answer those questions and happy to talk about lobbying as well.
So you were the first Kinder class, were you not, to spend the summer there in DC?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. All right. Well, Camille, I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate hearing about what you're doing, and it sounds really awesome. And thank you, right? Thank you for and I think lobbying is very important as well. So you have an ally in me. So thank you.
My only other advice to political science students is actually pay attention in Poli Sci 1100. It's a very important class.
Yeah, we cover a lot of territory in this class in a short period of time.
Yeah.
Just give you a good sense of, I call this class the instructor's manual for, you're being a citizen. And
that's well put, yeah.
Yeah, so, well, thank you so much, Camille. I really appreciate it.